I always give my disclaimer. I'm a professor of media arts here at the university, which is in the Department of Art. However, my PhD is in curriculum and instruction. My master's degree is in instructional technology. And my undergraduate degree is in secondary English. So I have a lot of background in education. And today's going to be a personal day. I don't like to get personal a lot with my classes, but this is going to be something different because critical thinking is such an intimate way of teaching. We have to be able to become very close to our students. So I'm going to start with a bunch of stories because we have to start from high school. You ready? I had a wonderful upbringing. The reason why is because I came from a family of readers. During my high school career, I would go in, and every summer was my best time because I was able to pick certain kinds of books. One summer, I remember picking Shakespeare. Had a wonderful time reading all of the comedies and tragedies and worked my way through some of the histories. Okay? And I even remember my senior year trying to find out what philosopher I wanted to take with me to my undergraduate education. So I picked Hermann Hesse because the Beatles were popular in my era. Eastern thought was popular. So Eastern philosophy was something of interest. Continuing the story. And there's a purpose behind all this. My junior year was special. Unlike today when people have a junior year abroad, they simply go off and take some classes. In my day, you had to apply to the university and be accepted just the same way you were accepted to the University of South Carolina. I applied to the University of London and was happily accepted. On going there, remember, I studied Shakespeare. Remember my background. I am an English teacher. I love Shakespeare. I go into a Shakespeare class. My professor is there, and he says, for the first session, I want you to be able to take the first scene of Macbeth, the witch's scene, and I want you to give me a cold reading. Fine. We all gave him a cold reading. I also had some background in theater at the time. After that, we go in another class. I want you to take the same scene, and I want you to give me a refined presentation. That was part of our homework. We gave a refined presentation. We go into another class. He says, now I want you to take the same scene, and I want you to give me variations upon the scene. If you know Shakespeare, you know that it is done now with great variation. So we gave him a terrible variation. But it was discussed and analyzed. At the end of the session, I go up to my professor and I say, sir, with all due respect, you know I'm the only American here. I said, in the United States, if I were studying Shakespeare, having a class of Shakespeare, as I move into my third week, I probably would have read 3 plays and analyzed them and discussed them. And he looked at me and he said, and that is the difference, Mr. Hanklosky, between the United States and Great Britain. In America, you study quantity. In England, we study quality. Put me in my place, right? Okay. And he was right. That was the British education. I was there to read English, not just to take courses and study. I was there to read. And that's what I did. Now, as a result of that, let's take a look at high schools. And that's why I started by telling you my high school story. What is the highest program for international student assessment? They call it PISA. Now, this is an international evaluation of different kinds of academic programs across the world. Which country do you think is rated the highest for reading, math, and science? Come on, guys. Where? Singapore? Singapore math. Interesting. Any other guesses? China. They're all together in the same area, right? And what we know is Oriental education is dedication, right? What else? England? Ah, because we read in England. Good. Germany. Ah, because they're very precise and everything has to be highly organized. You ready for the answer? Finland. Finland. Why? If we take a look at the characteristics of Finnish education, what we find, you remember a guy, George Bush, right? No child left behind. Where did he get it from? The Finns come out and say, we have a whatever it takes attitude. In other words, if I have a student, no matter what it takes to get him reading at that level, I'm going to do it. They have a graduation rate of 93%. United States, 75.5%. A lot better than us, isn't it? They even start school later than we do. They start at 7 years of age. That's when they have to go to school. By the way, you don't have to take any notes because if you notice the sheet I gave you, all of the information that I'm giving you here is on that sheet. I'd rather have your attention than have you writing. Now, one of the interesting things about Finland is more than 50% of the country is immigrants. My wife is an ESL teacher, English as a second language. She just retired. And they have to deal with problems in language, in culture. And yet, they have a 93% graduation rate. Okay. 30% of the students at some point need to have some kind of special help. That's why it's that whatever it takes attitude. They have small schools. All the teachers know all the students. They have no here, I love this. They have no mandated or standardized tests except for their high school graduation exam. Why waste your time teaching when you can concentrate on learning? That is Finland. And what they do is, here's the most important thing. In every single class, what they do is they engage the students in critical thinking. Why is critical thinking so important? This is not an easy session that you're going through, because I have to talk a lot. This is more like a PowerPoint chalk talk, because I have to get across certain information, and then we can talk. Okay. Come on. Okay. If you look at critical thinking as a definition, it's a process that explores rational and interpretive reflection to derive a potential solution to a topic or issue that has no clearly defined solution. It's not like hardcore science or math where you have a single answer. You have to be able to look at things from a variety of perspectives. Okay. So as a result of that, those of you who are here, take a moment, take one of the sheets that are here. That's the second sheet on here. And I just want you to take, not long, very quickly. Try and just do the first one. Identify a minimum of 3 topics or issues that you teach in your classes that have no singular, clearly defined answer or solution. for you guys, it should be easy. So they're from sociology. That was fast, right? Like your whole program. See why I told you this would be a good session for you guys? How are we doing? Everyone there? Close enough? Can I go on? Okay. Let's take a look at some samples that I want to use in here, because what I want to do is I want to try and cross the curricula at the university. So if you look at some of the samples that I've picked on, I have one from business and journalism. Students will create a national marketing PR strategy for the use of solar-powered heat pumps in the United States. Note, I do not say they're going to analyze them or they're going to study them. They're going to create them. That's the difference. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at students designing an experiment to measure the properties of 5 different plastic products in chemistry or engineering. They will design, they will experiment, they will look for new uses. Students will produce a photograph. By the way, where am I? I'm in media arts, right? So you're going to put up with me. One of mine. Students will produce a photograph using at least 4 to 8 photograph production rules. But what I decided to do, because I know I always get people in the sciences, we're going to look at a scientific way to create a picture. Students will write an 8 to 10 page paper, right? I'm an English teacher. An 8 to 10 page paper comparing 12 performed variations of the witch's introduction, which is what I had to do ultimately when I read English at the University of London. So we'll look at how you do that. And then the students will produce a brief of a current issue in the US Senate. You notice everything, we're not talking about studying anything. We're talking about creating things. We're talking about doing things, okay? And that's what is so important. And that's what Sachs tells us is so important. And one of the reasons why we're looking at these is because of Bloom's taxonomy. The Sachs review that we had was based upon Bloom's taxonomy. Not just Bloom's taxonomy, but Bloom's new taxonomy, which actually one of our professors here at the University of South Carolina chaired. So what we do is there are 2 ways of looking at this. This is what they traditionally show people. They show them the process dimensions. And Bloom would say what you do, the first thing you do, and look about this as a psychological way of how we learn. The first thing you do is you learn something, you remember it. Then, after you do that, you understand it because you make sense of it. From that, you apply it in some way. Then you analyze it, take it apart, deconstruct it. Then you evaluate your deconstruction, and then you create something new. That's what Bloom would say. If you look at the behavioral evidence of that, the behaviors that an individual has to go through, in order to remember something, you memorize it in many instances. After you memorize it, when you understand, what does it mean to understand something? That's a stupid term. Not very precise, is it? What you do is you comprehend it. How do you measure comprehension? When you apply something, what you do is you give it a procedural application. When you analyze something, you begin to critically analyze, and that's what we're starting to talk about today. From there you go and evaluate, which means that you synthesize. You bring it back together again. And when you create something, you create or solve original problems. Now, if we look at our first example, with the sample instructional exercises for critical analysis, what we find is that the students will create a national marketing strategy for the use of solar-powered heat pumps in the United States. What you do is you involve your students in creating various strategies according to target market demographics. Everybody comes in as a team. They all figure out how it would work, and it works very different in South Carolina. I'm from New York City. It's very different from here than it is from where I'm from. My wife's from Ohio. It's very different than over there. I'm from the city. Okay, so totally different market. They produce financial operations lists. And then from that, they begin to prioritize the list. And they begin to work as a team. What they do is this. They analyze and synthesize. This is something called accordion learning. Ready? What does it mean to analyze? Watch my hands. I deconstruct the information. The accordion goes out. More and more air goes in. More and more information goes into it, right? Then what I do, after my students begin to rip it apart and have all these elements, I force them to push it back together again and to take the most salient bits of information, and I want you to repeat back to me what it is that you're trying to say. How are you going to sell this heat pump in South Carolina? Got it? It's deconstruct, construct, deconstruct, construct, analyze, synthesize, analyze, synthesize. We could say deductive logic, inductive logic, deductive logic, whatever discipline you want to go, it all works the same way. Let's take a look at another learning theory. That's why I said this will get a little tough. Okay? Instead of Bloom's theory, there was a guy, Robert Gagne. Robert, wonderful professor, very smart man from the University of Florida. And he came up and wrote numerous books and is very well known for this theory called Gagne's hierarchy of learning. The one thing about this, though, is I find it very good for those people who are in the sciences and math. This is better, because watch what he says. What you want to do is you want to do knowledge recognition, generation, you make associations, multiple discriminations, concepts, principle learning, and solving problems. Here's an example. The reason why I said it's good for science, right? What you find if you take the periodic table of elements, what's the first thing you have your students do? They learn the elements' names, numbers. They learn what are in those little tiny boxes. And they begin to memorize it, don't they? After that, they have to be able to make associations. And what they do is they put them into families, metals, non-metals, right? So they associate them into a larger concept, or beginning to move into a larger idea. From there, they begin to multiply discriminate within the families themselves. You have noble gases, you have halogens in the non-metal family. You can do that with every single family, correct? See how we're beginning to now make associations to do the deconstruction? From here, we begin to organize them into different kinds of concepts. And as we put together our concepts, then we begin to create different kinds of compound elements. And from that, we can use the elements for assorted purposes. Very simple example. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, what do you get? Water, right? Water. And we can drink it, and we can save the world and save our lives. What do you get with 1 part hydrogen, 1 part oxygen? Huh? Peroxide? Hydrogen peroxide? Mm-hmm. No? Yeah. 1 part hydrogen, 1 part oxygen.
Hydroxide.
Yeah. Or commonly called heavy water. What is heavy water used for? Nuclear reactors. Kind of interesting, isn't it? So what you can do, if you go through the learning process here, you can see how you can either save the world or destroy it, going with this particular example. If we now take the two of them together, this is a very difficult slide to put up to understand. And I realize that. But I want to do this. I have to do it this way. Because I have to make you understand how it's working. The only differences that exist between Gagne's hierarchy of learning and Bloom's taxonomy is that Bloom now is emphasizing evaluation, analysis and evaluation, where Gagne is not. Gagne is talking about multiple discrimination and association. At the lower levels of learning, Gagne actually has us go through more steps. But I think what's most important, if we look here, concept and understanding are the same thing. Memorization and knowledge recognition, generation, use of terminology, all the same thing. Very similar. Concepts and understanding are very similar. When you put the traditional way of defining how to do something, a procedure, is that you put together multiple concepts in a formula to create an action. Okay? So what we find is that we begin to go up. We have multiple discrimination and association, concept learning, principle learning, which we just talked about. Then we begin to apply it in procedures. And this is the area of critical learning from here on. And it's that synthesis and it's that criticism that constantly has to occur. The accordion, right? The accordion going out and going in, going out and going in, and going out and going in. Take a look at the picture on the wall. You like it? Can anybody tell me what it is? A building? It looks like what? A sailboat. There's a sailboat in the middle. Anything else? A hotel? Bang. Bingo. Yes. Yes. I have a little insomnia. And sometimes I get up at night and I'll read during part of the night just to put myself back to sleep. Or when I'm somewhere else outside of town, e.g. Atlanta, Georgia, I go for walks. So I went for a walk one night. And I went to the Hilton, the Grand Hilton. What you're seeing, it's not a sail, it's a bar. So I went to a bar. I think I had half a beer because I sat there and I was just looking around and I saw that picture. It looks nothing like that there. Absolutely nothing like that. But I could see the picture in my head. I tell my students, you have to learn to study with your mind's eye, not your real eyes, your mind's eyes. My eyes see things that most people don't see. The question is, how do you construct it? Right? Let's pull out the accordion. What you do is, the first thing you do is you pull out a tripod because you have to use slow shutter speeds. Because if I handheld the shot, it would be all vibrating, right? Second thing, I need to be able to use short focal distances to increase foreground object size. We know that when we use like more wide-angle lenses, we can increase the objects within the foreground, which is why that sail looks so big. It's nothing more than something above the bar. If you look at small apertures, we know in physics that little tiny holes, when you put them in cameras, rather than big fat holes, will give you greater areas in depth of field. So our students have to learn that. This is all physics I'm giving you now, right? You go and you tilt the angle up. What happens when you tilt up a camera? The image, it expands, right? It expands. I knew it was going to expand, but somehow I have to make it look like that. I have to squish it together. How do I squish it together? So what I do is I get an ultra wide angle lens which has these humongous curves on them, almost like a fisheye. So I was able to take all of the elements. Those are floors. That's like 35 floors in the Grand Hilton in that shot. And That's how I began to put them together. The point of focus, I know, and we all know when we study the physics of visual imaging, we know that there's an area 1/3 in front and 2/3 behind that is in focus. So that meant I couldn't focus on this thing. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't. Because all that area in the front, all that great focus in the front would go to waste. I focused behind it. But it fell into the area of focus. So you don't have to always focus on something to get it in there, in your shot. The contrast and the color are increased for cognitive retention. It took me an hour to take this thing. The reason why it took me so long is because first that sail was red, and it was ugly. And then it was yellow, and it was uglier. And then it got green, and it looked not nice. And then it turned blue, and I said, oh, blue is the way, right? The higher contrast, we know from perception psychology, increase in contrast increases cognitive retention. So that was simply done. And then the ISO reciprocity matches color shift. So that's something where I increased the sensitivity of my film chips. And it was this is a digi shot. So all the film chips, I had to make them more sensitive. I increased the sensitivity of them, hence increasing the contrast between them. And that's how I got the shot. You got the idea? You see how I pulled out that accordion? I tell my students, let's take a look at this as an example. All right, you got the idea? Go home and apply some of the concepts. When you come back with your next shot, I want you to tell me how many of these concepts you applied. It generally takes 2 years or more years to create an artist, a reasonable artist, okay, in this area. So let's take a look at critical thinking now for critical writing activities.
Hi, I'm Glynn, Assistant Provost and Executive Director for Teaching, Learning plus Technology at Stony Brook University. And this is Innovations in Education. In our show, we feature faculty and staff using innovative approaches to teaching and applications of educational technology that have had a positive effect on student learning. In our show today, I'm joined by Charles Haddad, an Associate Professor in the School of Journalism. We will be discussing how writing can be used to promote critical thinking. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you teach and the venue in which you teach it?
Yes, I am a writing professor in the journalism school, the new journalism school. I teach both ends of the spectrum. The beginners who are just entering our school, I'm kind of one of the gatekeepers, and I teach the seniors that are working on major pieces of writing, how to write magazine writing. So I have the two ends of the spectrum.
Okay. And what size classes are they generally?
My classes are no bigger than 18 students.
Okay.
I teach in a workshop setting, and I use the Socratic method. I try to push as much work as I can onto the students, make them do all the hard work.
Okay. So we've mentioned critical thinking. Can you define what you think the core skills of critical thinking are?
Yeah, this is a good question. First of all, it's the ability to think well, think independently. Okay. The ability to sift through material and marshal evidence to make an argument or a case for something. The ability to sort of work material to come up with a new understanding. What I would say that sort of the gold standard is to do something I call commit quiet mischief. That is, push the envelope of understanding with the knowledge you have acquired.
Okay. And do you think that we can teach critical thinking? I mean, is that a trait that may already be inherent in a student and that you can just maybe refine a little bit, or can you truly change it? That's
a great question, because that's one of the big debates in academia. Can you teach critical thinking? My personal experience is that you can. That when students are given the skills and practice those skills, they develop what I would call an attitude and a habit of critical thinking. That is, they learn to be skeptical. They don't accept things at face value. They go and verify and find out for themselves and then ask themselves, now what can I do with this information? What's something new? A lot of it is an attitude. A lot of it is opening their eyes to a way of seeing the world, that I can do this.
Okay. And why do you think writing is a particularly good way to teach those skills?
Because writing is thinking in its purest form. So if your writing is muddled, then your thinking is muddled.
Okay. And so how do you guide them through that process of improving their writing and improving their critical thinking skills at the same time?
To me, it's really all about thinking. It sort of, when I see their writing, and if their writing is clear and compelling, that tells me, one, they've grasped the material, and they are using their minds effectively to work through it. So we use a series of exercises, an ever-escalating series of challenges that force them, that put them in a position that they have to use their mind and have to think things through.
And are those a series of what you would call critically more difficult thinking exercises?
Yes, yes. It's a series of assignments. In my beginning class, we start very basically. The beauty of many people don't realize this, but even in the simplest news story about a fire, that the intellectual rigor involved in making that series of facts clear, to understand the natural flow of that order, of those facts in a way that a stranger can comprehend what happened, is very intellectually rigorous. And so, for me, journalism is just a platform through which to teach critical thinking, which to me is one of the key skills that anybody should acquire in coming to university, no matter what your discipline.
So would you say critical thinking is synonymous with teaching people how to question well?
Yes, that's at the front. That is one of the fundamental skills, and that's something that we push very hard in the journalism school, is how, I call it the craft of questioning. It is a craft, and at its highest form is an art form. And to question well, you must be a critical thinker. You must have the skills of a critical thinker.
Okay, so let's say you have a freshman student who is not very good at this process.
Which would describe about, as we all know as professors, about 95% of them.
Okay, so you encounter a piece of unclear, muddy, conceptually confusing writing. How do you lead them through this process?
Well, it starts with the whole tenor of the class. I want my classes to have a sense of danger. The students, the moment they walk in, that they know they got to be on their game, so that they're alert, they're paying attention. So they know when they come into my class, they will be called on, that there's a very good chance, not only by me, but by their peers. So in our classes, we take their work and we put it up for everybody to see with your name on it.
Right.
Because what counts, I've learned, is not what I think, but what their peers think. So when they develop their own standard of excellence. So there's no way I want my piece of work in front of my peers where they can obviously see this is sloppy, I didn't do the work, I haven't thought it through. So this is where pushing the work back onto the students come in. I put their work up and through a series of guided questions make them critique it.
The same set of guided questions each time?
Say that again?
Is it the same set of guided questions?
Depends on the situation. I'm going for the same principles, but every situation can be different, so that teach skepticism, not to accept things at face value, even if it is accepted conventional wisdom, to teach them to question and verify. If that's the universal goal, the question I ask may be different each time to get them to have that epiphany. So I use their work as sort of the foil, if you will, to teach this lesson. So I'm trying to move them to the place where they start to ask the questions themselves, that they've developed their own critical ear. And it takes at least, to even get on the right path a semester. This is difficult stuff. Here's the thing. Most young people love a challenge. They may complain, they may whine, but at heart they cannot resist. A great challenge put in the right way, and they almost cannot resist reaching for that bar.
Got the idea? Pretty good for writing, isn't it? Okay. Keeping things in writing makes them clarify those ideas. And that's the whole idea. Whoops. Okay. Okay. All right. So what's happening in critical writing? What he's essentially saying is he uses the Socratic method, so everybody has to be defending themselves. There's a lot of questioning, there's a lot of answering, there's a lot of defense. As a result, they're going through conceptual answers. They have to give conceptual answers to the questions. They don't just give statements of the information. They have to be able to compare and contrast a lot of the optional answers, a lot of the critical thinking. They have to be able to criticize everyone's answers. That's why he's saying he teaches them to become skeptical. And then as a result, they're summarizing all of the potential answers that they can do for their own papers. And what they're doing is they're creating a final reflection on their own criticism. Okay? Now if we begin to look at reading, let's get away from writing, let's get into reading. And if we take a look, let's get back to my friends in London and the problem that we were faced. And looking at having to create an 8 to 10 page paper comparing 12 performed variations of the witch's introduction. By the way, anybody know Roman Polanski? Yeah, you do? Okay. Do you know that Roman Polanski went back and did a version of Macbeth? Did you know? Anyone know that? He selected a new director, a first-time director, to do just the witches scenes. Surprise, surprise. Blew me away because it happened after I went through this whole experience. You know who he picked? A man by the name of Hugh Hefner. And the witches scenes look like they came right out of Little Annie Fanny. Not that I don't read Playboy, but some of the things that are there. It had that same kind of cartoonish experience to it. And I looked at that and I said, God, my professor was right. Okay. So as a result of this, what you do is you develop conceptual answers again to the various kinds of questions that are being posed. You look at conceptual answers inside of your classroom exercises. So you create exercises for the students to get them to look at things in a higher level of thinking. You get them to compare and contrast them through debate. Then you outline flowchart or concept map development of concepts. Okay. Concept map is interesting. It's an interesting concept. I flowchart. I'm an instructional designer by trade, by profession. So I'm used to flowcharting and breaking down all the yes and no answers and getting them into different ways of trying to be able to do certain procedures. But here, what they're saying is that concept mapping is just putting things in an array of spots and just drawing lines between them and drawing correlations. And the concept is to constantly do the accordion concept. Analyze, synthesize, analyze, synthesize, analyze, synthesize. Keep going back and forth. And then do a self-critique in some kind of a final paper. See how they raise up and up the whole time? Let's take a look at another way of doing activities. There are ways of studying critical writing. There are ways of studying critical reading. Now let's get into having students in your class all working together. And we'll do these called think, share, pair activities. And there's a whole array of them. Think, share, pair simply means that when you're teaching one of your classes, you break your students up into groups of two. Go to the person next to you and try and solve a problem. Okay? And that's think, share, pair. And you can start out by working with your groups and coming to class consensus. Having everyone in your class come to some kind of consensus. Then you break them up into pairs. And as you say, take two people together and solve this problem. Then what you do after that is you say, all right, the other pair who are next to you, evaluate what the other person has done and vice versa. So what you're doing is you're increasing the debate. As you look at TAPS, which is called talking aloud, paired problem solving, and that's one of the secrets of think, share, pair. If I tell you to solve a problem, one person is the recorder and one person is the problem solver. The problem solver says, look, this is how you do it. If we're going to be selling heat pumps here in America and we've got to do it in South Carolina, this is what you do. Bam, 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 bam. And he starts saying, going, and this is why you're doing it. And then the other person keeps saying, why? Justify that. And then as a result of that, you begin to make your ideas more concrete among the students. From there, they begin assessing words through checkmates, okay? And these are people who check on you, who are other pair people. And then there's another way of doing something called 10+2 process, which people who have come to sessions like this, not TAs, but general faculty that come to sessions probably have not had a chance to see much about this. But 10-2 is where you lecture for 10 minutes and you give them a problem that they have 2 minutes to solve. Lecture, 2 minutes to solve a problem. Lecture, 10 minutes, 2 minutes to solve it. And you can do that for an entire period to begin to get your students to understand certain things. So if you're TAing in languages, for instance, you can take grammar. You can break it up into vocabulary and 10 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay. And then lastly, case study and mini research problem activities. We have a lot of people in areas of public health science services and policy management. We get a lot of people in retailing that do a lot of this, where they take a look at, get the students to analyze bullet cases. Give them a case for a company. And get them to break it up into individual elements that they have to be able to study. How do you create a brief, for instance? There are different elements. There are specific elements in a brief. Begin to write them down. Make a whole list of them. From that, take some presented cases and fixing presented cases, look at multiple choice. Begin to see how they're being used in different kinds of cases. From that, develop original mini case elements. So you may find variations upon the elements that are being studied in the course and say, yeah, but in today's world, this is what's happening. We're not doing this 50 years ago. So you advance the knowledge, help the students do that. And as a result, you formulate new mini cases as a result of that, and then you begin to defend them. Okay? Now, as a result of that, what's the whole bottom line of this session? This long session, right? You have to be able to try and figure out what you're supposed to do with those students. You have to make them critical thinkers. And these are people who can distinguish between fact and opinion. They can base judgments upon different kinds of evidence that's being given to them. They can see a whole bunch of multiple options and debate those options to say, which one should we pick today, or which do you think is better? They can see multitudes of perspectives to create those options, because I see the world differently than you. One of the big things is they learn to accordion. They analyze, synthesize, deconstruct, construct, deconstruct, construct, right? You go deductive logic, inductive logic, deductive logic, inductive logic. And they begin to relate hypotheses and conclusions in harmony with one another, and they can apply validation and reliability to the principles that you are teaching them to do and come to some kind of professional conclusion. Okay, boy, that was long, huh? How'd I do? You got the idea? Yes? Okay. As a result, what I'd like you to do is now go to the second page, second part of the sheet that I asked you to work on, where you put those questions, and try and put down some answers. Okay, how are we doing? I'm tired of talking. It's your turn. Who wants to share some of the things they teach in their classes and different ways, because it's your idea, it's your job now to help somebody next to you or somebody else across the room to get another different idea. I don't have all the answers. You have them, yes. And when we start, let's go with first name and department and course that you're teaching.
My name is Jeremy. I'm in the School of Music, and teaching 100 which is basic introductions to history. One of the biggest things we discuss is comparison of historically informed performances versus modern performance. And it's kind of a tricky area. You have documents to try to present how performances will be done, so to make students compare and contrast those things. And the potential instruction methods, it's things that I've kind of used but haven't really thought about it this clearly, to look at the pair and share. Have students get together and discuss why they felt the modern performance was better or worse than the historically informed performance or vice versa. Have them compare opinions, contrast opinions, and then share with each other. Just because there's no right answer to that, it doesn't matter. So that's what I would do for that.
Can I give just an idea just to bounce off? There's a theory called concept attainment. It's a rather old theory, but I love it. What it teaches, and it sounds like it might work for you. Concept attainment states that when you're working with a group of learners, what you do is you can't give them all the right answers. So what you do, because they're hard to define, so what you do is you say, hey guys, here's a wrong answer. Now here's a right answer. Now you give me your ideas. They'll say here's an answer. You say, well, that's moving close. Let's see if we can improve it. So what you do is you contrast. You do appropriate, inappropriate, and what you do is you begin to bring it closer and closer until they can finally have a greater understanding of it. You like that? Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah.
Cameron, I'm in the math department, and I'm teaching 12 and I, basic math course. So something you deal with is sets of numbers. You deal with this in every math class, and the question comes up, what is a set? And then you define it to be a collection of elements. You say, what is an element? And things that are contained in a set. So we have a circular definition, like one definition applies the other. So how do you form this non-circular definition? So the question is formed mathematically impossible. So how do you get someone to understand? So I was thinking we could pair students up to see how to address this problem. But there is no. Y'all know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
What?
I love it.
Okay.
So when you get the students to be able to debate that, and there's no true answer to that, do you find that the debates come closer to it? Let's talk about, I always talk about something called truth and truthfulness.
Okay.
Truth is what we can accept as reality and truth, close to truth as possible. Truthfulness is a degree of truth. It's almost like validity and reliability. Okay, and do you find that when you work with them that way, that they get closer and closer to look at it from higher theoretical perspectives?
Well, 95% of the class doesn't see the problem. And then the 5% who see it kind of get stuck, and they typically get to the point where they say, you have a set that doesn't contain the elements. And then you get really stuck. They don't really make good progress on it. But neither do I. I don't know.
Okay. Other ideas?
I was just going to ask you a question. So, because I'm math phobic, right? So I'm trying to imagine myself in your class. You're doing that to me.
Okay.
And I would be very angry, I think. So my question, because I think I understand conceptually what you're trying to do, right? We all want to get them to think, but is it fair to the student, or do they? I'm just asking that.
Right.
Do they feel set up or frustrated when you're done? Because to me that would inhibit learning.
I'm frustrated with the definition. I think everyone is, but something, you can give someone a set of numbers and they go, I know what this is, I can take things from it, and these things are elements. So you feel comfortable using them, but the actual definition behind it is confusing and is ambiguous. And when I asked them this question, it wasn't to, see if they could come up with an answer, but just to get them to think why it is difficult. So I wouldn't really test them on it.
Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of like my thing, because I think that for me there's some things where within our disciplines they just have to say, yeah, you just have to say this is it.
Yeah.
Right? And so maybe there's some things that are just on that lower level spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Just know it, believe it, trust me that it is. And there are other things maybe that we can engage in.
Right.
Okay.
I would like to expand on this and then tell you something that I think is important in education.
Sure.
This is
You want to do first name and course?
Mickey Gibson, and I'm in the educational studies. in the PhD program. This is a type of a Socratic seminar, and when I taught middle school, that's what we did, because we wanted children in the early ages to start learning how to think that way. So we would put them in groups, and we'd put maybe an M&M or something on there, and you had to eat, you had a chance to eat all three, but you had to eat them because everyone had to speak, because they won't speak, and we had to train them to do this. But it was good exercise for them because it had them to think about questions that are really, there are no answers. It's just coming up with a compromise of what you think it is, and it helped them to critically think or use those skills on how to think and go beyond the knowledge or the comprehension, or even analyzing. You really are going out there and trying to decide. So I really liked that, and it took a while. It took several years, starting 6th grade, 7th grade. A group of teachers vertically taught, and we said, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. I do it. By the time they were 8th grade, you didn't even have to tell them. They were wanting to do this. They were excited about it. And so this was a good thing. But talking about, do I have a
Sure. Yes, please do.
I have this thing about, you probably heard of field dependent and field independent.
Yes.
Have you?
Yes.
I know there's been research in the way of teachers, and it was not enough evidence to prove this. But
Yes.
I have a different way of thinking about this because I think people do think that way.
Mhm.
And I think about, and what that is, that either you think in parts or you think in relationships. And there are people that think in relationships, which we compared this in testing, they do a lot better because they're able to think through something and analyze and see the pieces, where people think in parts, they don't generalize the information. Well, I'm one of those that thinks in parts. I'll be honest with you, I'm polarized. So knowing this about myself, and if I can tell my teachers, my children about this in the education field, look at yourself, decide who you are. Because this is what we have to do, is decide, because we don't want to be on a continuum on either side. What would be better if you could see that, okay, I think in parts, this person thinks in relationships. What can we do to move ourselves more to the middle and talk about it that way? Because if you know this, then say, okay, I'm thinking in details, I need to move this way. But it's okay to be in details, and it's okay to be in relationships. But swinging back and forth and pulling it both together to get this critical thinking idea.
Yes.
And so I think that is an important concept. But to know your students, students know themselves, and you know yourself on the way you teach.
Yes, yes.
What do you think?
That's great. And for those of you who might not be familiar, you may be familiar, this is field dependent, independent. The second way of looking at this theory is called locus of control.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, that's a second way of looking at it. So depending upon the discipline from which you come,
Okay.
and you come more from the field dependent, independent perspective of it. And yeah, the idea is to get people together to start to look at problems. As a matter of fact, I have a second session here that it's called creativity. It's called teaching creative thinking. And as a matter of fact, if I can do this for a moment, I teach a course in creative thinking, but Gagne would say, he stops it, and he says that the highest level of learning is problem solving, which is, let's get to your field dependent, independent. That is looking at the relationships and the knowledge. But what we find is that there is actually a higher learning. It's called problem finding. Einstein came out and said, science is nothing more than the solving of problems, of mathematical problems. He said the real problem in science is not in solving the problems, but in trying to find the problems that need to be solved. How to get your brain to go farther beyond. And I teach this, as a matter of fact, if anybody wants to take my course in creative thinking, come at the end of the semester, at the end of the period, and I teach it next semester. I know exactly what creativity is. Only from myself. I can't give it to you. Everybody has to search for what creativity is for themselves. And this course is a big exploration. And my second session that I teach in the creativity side, how to teach creative thinking, deals with just that. So if anyone is interested, see me after class. It only meets once a week. It's a fun class. And hopefully you learn a lot. But this is, okay, other people, yes?
So I'm teaching a course in world literature, and I'm using a lot of these methods to try to get them to debate and critique, and I don't know, they seem to be afraid of critiquing each other. And no matter if I put them in groups, no matter if I put an example up, and the class is just like, I say, okay, so is this a good answer? What's wrong with this answer? Are there any problems? What do we think? And it's just, well, why? Well, and there's just no, so I'm having a lot of trouble getting them motivated to pick things apart. I think they can. I just can't get them to do it.
Okay, I have an idea on how to do it, but I'd rather have somebody else talk.
Well, the idea that
And then
comes
over
to
here.
my head is that guy Haddad's idea that maybe you correct one, just red ink all over it, put it up on the wall, and I've heard, I don't know, that for all of them, that motivation of playing on their ego, that seems to work for Haddad. The guy from Stony Brook.
Yes, yes.
And I don't know if you can get away with that. Is that a FERPA violation?
I just mean in terms of, I'm not even talking about them writing essays and us to, we're just talking about, things like, well, why are we reading this work? Is it important? Is it not important? And even with that, they won't.
Okay. I have something to say about that, but I'd rather have somebody else talk, and then I'll go, okay?
If you could do something, maybe it sounds more like they're just afraid to meet each other.
Yeah.
So if you do something like, maybe get them to do it anonymously, so like they exchange papers.
Yes, I'm so happy I asked you to talk. Keep going.
Exchange papers, or you can do it like, you could give them give them an example and have them, put something in the box, and you randomly pull out box, and you don't even know who's your reading, but then they can talk about what each other said, or whatever, just keep it anonymous, so they don't feel like they're.
Could I give a little idea? You were spot on. Okay, one thing you can do, and I do have another session that teaches this, by the way, for TAs. It's in my TA sections. I have one where I teach you how to create a rubric. And one of the things about a rubric is that you dedicate to print what is important in an analysis and at what level you will deem that to be an A, a B, a C, and a D, or an F. And the rubrics are a lot easier to produce than you think. And when I first started, I take you to a site where you get free rubric design. And they do things like how to analyze a paper. And then it talks about analysis, clarity of information, use of resources. And it gives you samples. And when I first started using this rubric system, it's called rubystar.com, rubystar.org. It's www.rubystar.4 teachers.org. And if you go to there, you can open up your own name, and you can go into create rubrics, and they'll give you samples. And it is very intuitive. It's very easy to use. So that's a way that you can make things more concrete for your students, because this is tough, like he said, this is tough stuff to teach. And there are lots of different answers. But a rubric is a nice way to make them more concrete. Okay. Who else? Okay.
I'm teaching a loss prevention class for retailers. I'm Karen in the retailing department, and I'm teaching a new class, loss prevention for retailers. And I'm going to incorporate critical writing skills by having students evaluate the current practices of a local retailer, and then think through the problems that exist and the problems that happen to all retailers, and then specifically to that particular retailer, and to recommend best practices based on what they've learned in class.
Good. Comments?
asking that.
Who's going to define best practices?
The students.
I was hoping somebody would say that question.
Okay. The students will define the best practices based on what they have learned, read, discussed, what have you.
Okay.
As applied to, you know.
Okay. That's a great idea, because there's another theory in education that says if you want to be able to get the student to learn to teach, to think critically, instead of making the student, make the student the teacher. You make the student, no you don't, you do it this way, right? Yeah, this is how I do it. No, I do it this way. And then what happens is you begin to get them engaging at a higher level because you have given them the power. Yeah.
One other point to add to that, and what I taught was math. So giving them that idea, get a teacher, I would say, okay, how did you do it? Because there's more than one way to do it. And I would always want them to realize there's more ways to get the answer. So I would say, okay, if you're the teacher, how would you teach this? And then, okay, do you have another way? And I'd have all of that. I said, okay, let's make division so you could all see that we all have the same value at the end, but we all have different ways of showing the way we see it in our heads. And so they could teach it that way. So I would like that to teach it.
Good. Other comments?
Sure, I'll go ahead.
Go for it.
The 10-minute lecture, 2-minute problem solving, I think, is one of the methods.
Yes.
But again, like his example of posting up the thing on the wall.
Oh, what class are you teaching, by the way?
I'm teaching. My name is David Hancock. I'm teaching Spanish 121, and one of the ways to get students to grasp concepts is to talk about another discipline. In other words, not just focusing on grammar and vocab in Spanish, but talking about something like a controversial topic, maybe in Latin America, or math. But anyhow, I was thinking at the end of the semester, when supposedly they've got some skills behind them, that they could write a 250-word essay of defending their stance on a topic that involves the U.S. and Latin America, like amnesty or legalization of drugs, and that way, there's no right answer. It would encourage them to defend their, like I said, their stance, and at the same time, they got to use the grammar and vocab that they've been exposed to. And I guess the method that would apply would be the one I keep talking about, posting it on the wall.
Good idea.
I've been in some classes where the teacher has picked a particularly good essay and asked the student if she could post it anonymously on the blackboard as an example, and then sometimes we'll even go through it in class discussion later and say, why is this a good essay? What did this author do well? So that might be inverting the process you're talking about, but that might be successful too.
I'm looking at my clock. We have 60 seconds left to fill out those evaluations. They always want us to, and wait, before you fill it out, please, 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 the most important question on here is the last one. That's how you will help us to better serve you. The last question. And of course, fill out everything else as well.